Azkuna zentroa Alondiga Bilbaok ongi etorria ematen dizue Gutun Zuria Bilbao letren nazioarteko jaialdira. Ondoren, La guerra y la tregua, el pasado y el futuro izeneko solasaldia izango da, Bibiana Collado Cabrera irakasle eta idazlearen, Abdellah Taïa idazle eta kazetariaren, eta Starobinets kazetari eta idazlearen artean. Elkarrizketa honek 3 literatura biltzen ditu, hasiera batean paraleloak diruditenak, baina gurutzatzeko joera gutxikoak. Eremu geografiko desberdinetatik gaitzespen sozialaren esperientzia jorratzen dute beren literaturan. Mesedez, itzali telefono mugikorrak eta gozatu elkarrizketaz. Azkuna Centroa Alondiga Bilbao os da la bienvenida a Gutun Zuria Bilbao, Festival Internacional de las Letras. A continuación tendrá lugar la conversación titulada La guerra y la tregua, el pasado y el futuro, entre Bibiana Collado Cabrera, profesora y escritora, Abdellah Taïa, escritor y periodista, y Starobinets, periodista y escritora. Esta conversación reúne 3 literaturas que en un principio podrían parecer paralelas, poco proclives a cruzarse. Desde ámbitos geográficos diferentes, abordan en su literatura la experiencia del rechazo social. Por favor, es el momento de apagar los teléfonos móviles y disfrutar de la conversación. Azkuna Centroa Alondiga Bilbao welcomes you to Gutun Zuria Bilbao International Literature Festival. Now we present the conversation La guerra y la tregua, el pasado y el futuro, between Bibiana Collado Cabrera, teacher and writer, Abdellah Taïa, writer and journalist, and Starobinets, journalist and writer. This conversation combines 3 types of literature that initially might seem parallel and unlikely to cross paths. From different geographical areas, they address the experience of social rejection in their literature. Please, it's time to turn off your mobile phones and enjoy the conversation.
Bueno, creo que ya.
I think that we're ready to go. Everybody's ready with their devices. Channel 2 for the English, if anybody's listening to the English. Good evening, and thank you very much for coming here tonight. Thank you for spending these few minutes with us. And the idea is that we want to hold a fluent conversation, we want to speak to each other, and what we are going to do is tying up links between the different books. And as I've already had the opportunity of reading these books, thanks to the translations into Spanish, I'm going to be the person that is going to kick off with this conversation. Perhaps you've been looking things up on Google, or perhaps you've been making inquiries on the books, and the 3 texts that bring us together here are this book by Abdellah Taïa, Tienes que mirar by Starobinets y Yeguas Exhaustas by Bibiana. But I wanted to start off by pointing out something that I believe is important, and I think that is going to unite us. And this is just a short story that I would like to tell you. My mother is called Maria, and she never went to school. There were 3 siblings, 2 boys and 1 girl, and the only one that went to school was one of the boys, the youngest boy, the smallest boy. And in fact, my mother was not even included in the register, in the census, because, well, anyway, in those days, in those past days, they registered when she was old, practically when she was going to get married, which was also when she learned to read and write so that she could get her driving license. And I am her daughter, and I have a degree in Spanish philology. I'm also have a PhD in Latin American literature, and I'm here invited by the International Festival of the Letters in Bilbao with 2 international writers. So the first thing that I would like to say to you people is thank you. And if I start off by pointing this out, it's because I believe that the origin and your circumstances, where you come from, are going to be key elements in all three books. And in the case of Yeguas Exhaustas, the main protagonist, Beatriz, is going to be seeing herself in anecdotes that seem to be unimportant, but which remind her all the time about the place where she comes from, and also what her origins are like. And in the case of La Vida Lenta, something similar is going to happen, because we have this person from Paris with his studies in French literature. However, these people, it seems that they never ever find the place where they're supposed to be, because there's a system and there's a circumstance that is reminding them that they're not where they're supposed to be. And in a way, what you also have to look at, the issue of location is going to be one of the key elements, because it's going to determine the possibility of carrying out that exercise of the body and of fatherhood, which is something that has to be carried out. So I think that in all three we're seeing subjects that are influenced by the circumstances, that are influenced by where they come from, and that this is going to be an important thing in our writings. So I wanted to give you the floor, and perhaps this could be the starting point for the conversation. I don't know, perhaps Abdellah, Taïa would like to say something and kick off. Yes, thank you very much. Good evening, everybody, and I will take the floor. Well, thank you very much for having invited us to talk about some very important things, at least for me, which have to do with your origin, the origin of origins, that is. And I was really moved to listen to you talk about your mother, Bibiana, because it's clearly, I clearly would have never become a writer if I wouldn't have been the son of my mother, a woman called Barka Alali, who's a woman born in Morocco, who comes from the country, and she lived in a city very close to a city called Bedi Bedel, which is a very poor place. And her first husband, well, France sent her first husband to the war in Indochine in the 50s. France sent her first husband, and that first husband lost his life in what is nowadays Vietnam, and in fact he was buried there too. And France paid her a certain amount of money for this death. They paid the money to the family of the first husband, and what they did was use that money, keep that money, and they expelled my mother. They threw her out. That was in the 50s. And then my mother, who was I think 21 years old at the time, I don't know how she managed to do this, not only as far as surviving is concerned, but also to find a new man, a new person, with whom she had 9 children. And this man, I'm talking about a Moroccan woman, okay, between inverted commas, that people consider to be illiterate, and she was everything but illiterate. So for me, or from my point of view, just like for you, Bibiana, it's very important to talk about this path that takes us to the moment where I, Abdellah Taïa, that what I did was write and get my works published. And I objectively believe too that the fights that I've been involved in and the struggles that I have been involved in are not as significant as the struggles that my mother was involved in, because I was born in 1973. And my mother, this woman that I've described, had already found another man, and she managed to migrate to Rabat, which is where I was born. So the writing that stems from me is not only the end result of my university studies, And it doesn't only happen because I met Victor Hugo or Baudelaire, for instance, but also comes from the fact that I lived with this woman who'd covered this path, who always spoke out loud and who couldn't care less if other people considered to be an undignified woman or a bad woman. I think that the fact that I'm a homosexual, I dare say, and I was born in 1973, I think that I've also learned, thanks to this woman, I've learned to exist, and to resist and to write too, because writing is not only about having a university training, it's not that, or having academic training. It's something that originates from the roots of an imaginarium that goes beyond ourselves. And it's as if it stems from a shout that arrived before we did. And the only thing I'm doing is following the shout. I'm following where it takes me. And that's what you have to do. You have to shout. You have to shout all the time.
All you for inviting me here and coming here. I want to apologize for my English because it's not my native language, and so I actually, when I speak Russian, I can do much better. You can imagine that everything I say is like twice as smart. So I'm very touched by both of your stories. But I was like in a kind of a panic thinking of what I can suggest here, and I decided not to start from my past. Although, no, okay, I'll say a few words about my past. I think I had a chance to become a writer due to the fact that in Russia we had quite a very narrow period of freedom in which you could actually, in which I could, being absolutely, I'm coming from a normal family which has nothing to do with literature, philology, or whatever. My mother is a programmist, and my father was a geophysician. So I had the opportunity to enter the university because at that period of time, like in the end of 90s, in the beginning of 2000s, it was a period when it was really, if you wanted to reach some goal, that was possible. So I just decided to study philology, and I started studying philology. And then the same happened with me becoming a writer. At that period, we had a possibility of really proposing your texts to various publishing houses, and we had various publishing houses. Now we have one. And yes, one huge which swallowed all the small. And I could write whatever I wanted. So now I think of that time as of some lost paradise, and I actually lost I lost not only that freedom, but the country itself. I currently live in Tbilisi. It is a city in Georgia. I'm kind of a writer in exile. I left Russia after the war started. And I'm safe as a living body, but I really feel that this may be, in a way, that may ruin me as an author, because when you write in Russian, you actually need to be surrounded with Russia. So and of course you need to be published. And all the readers, most of the readers are also there. So as Russian language is my main tool, I just try to figure out how I can do without it, because I cannot skip to another language And this language is somehow, like, it looks a little bit doomed at the moment.
¿Te preocupa entonces lo que...
So, are you worried about what could happen?
What can happen, like, in what way?
No, con la escritura.
No, with writing and with literature.
Most of bad things have already happened with writing and literature in Russia. 2 days ago, we have some writers that that left Russia after the war started, or a little bit later, because it is really, like, the choice is very narrow. You either stay there and keep silence in all ways, like you keep silence in conversations and you keep silence in your books. You just pretend that nothing is happening, and you write about something else. That is possible, but I didn't think I could do that. Or you, like, you struggle, you try to do something about the situation, but that is that way finally brings you to prison, and some of my friends are already there. So, or you leave, but then you are separated from your main tool, from the language itself, and of course from the material that is there. So what happened is that those who stayed are either silent, or they are quite happy with what is happening there. And 2 days ago, they came up with forming, it is called the Creative Union of 24th of February, which was the day when the war started. And that Creative Union of 24th of February is a union of writers, Russian writers. And I know half of those guys. I am, like, 10 or maybe 15 years ago, we were drinking vodka together after some literary festivals, just like this one. And we were friends. So now they came up with that statement that all the enemy writers, like myself, those who betrayed their country, should never be published in Russia anymore. And so that all the money should be transferred to them, because they, as they say, because they stayed with their people.
Wow.
And that is so Soviet. That is, all the words are from my Soviet childhood.
Madre mía.
Dear me. Dear me. Wow. Well, yes, it's a very complex situation you've been talking about now. And the truth is that we could carry on talking about this, and if you want to carry on talking about it, go ahead, and please do so.
I should make a joke now.
No, lo que...
No, look... Well, Bibiana, is writing for you like a war? Yeah, well, yes, perhaps. Well, I think that it would be interesting, it would be beautiful for us for each of you to talk about your book and also describe what it is those books are telling us, or things that cannot be told. I think that that would be a beautiful thing to do. And I think that what we could also think is what has happened about your books. And in the case of Anna, well, it's very interesting to see that being a marvelous science fiction author with a lot of recognition in Spain, you have been very popular. And it's a book that doesn't have to do with science fiction. And well, perhaps you could talk a little bit about that, and then perhaps you and Abdellah could talk about your own book. I think that what you have in common are books that talk about what people usually don't talk about. Things that receive no attention or are not put under the spotlight. Things like that. Yes, I fully agree with that. And sometimes when we impose silence, you always have to find some kind of strategy to do away with that silence and try to find a way of expressing yourself. But in my case, and I have to say that I'm always at war, firstly because I'm homosexual, and when I was a child I was under the impression that I was living in hell, and that there was only hell. That was my final destination. But I think that the war that had to be fought was based on not accepting what everybody else was telling me to do. That I live in hell, and that is my ultimate fate and the only hope that I had. So what I had to do is find some kind of space within myself, in my body as a child and as a teenager. I had to find a space where I could turn things around completely, where I could ignore what other people were saying. They were trying to annihilate me, they were trying to destroy me as a person, and it's the kind of everyday death that I was experiencing. I don't know where I got the energy from to do this, but I did like my mother did. I think that I copied what my mother did, and I found this space where the war that I fight, that I have to fight every day, allows me to feel comfortable with myself. And well, the fact that you look at what my mother has done for us, or she's never going to understand the homosexuality of her child as a homosexual, as I am a homosexual, but I feel very close to this woman, because she is not homophobic. Neither are my sisters, nor are they racist. It's the system, it's the political system that is racist and homophobic. That is the people governing Morocco. Those are the people that sometimes use your friends and family to kill you. And when I understood that, it was like a revolution in my head. And that is that my mother and my sisters, when people insulted me, or when they looked at me with an evil eye, so to speak, I had to say that it wasn't their words, it was the words of the system, it was the words of the people in power that wanted to eliminate us. So it wasn't a war to destroy, it was a war to deny the beauty of my life. I have 6 sisters, all of them are older than I am. And they were born before I was born, and they've had time to generate a sort of a universe of solidarity. And I sincerely believe that, yes, okay, I'm a boy and I'm homosexual, but I'm like them. I'm a girl just like they are, really. And I don't find that that is an insult, because I was there to help them. I use them as a source of inspiration too. And when, for instance, they wanted to have sexual intercourse with a neighbor or with a fisherman or with a fishmonger, I understood it perfectly well. I was the messenger boy for their love. I was the sexual messenger boy for my sisters. And when I was a child, I thought that that was beautiful, because I was the boy that Moroccan society said that was supposed to be very strong and had to become a man and had to be a good man. But I was the guy that helped these sisters of mine to be what the system didn't want to be. So let's say that one of the major wars for me, one of the major struggles for me, had to do with feeling that pride. My sisters used to grab me by my hand and say, "Look, come along with me, because I'm going to meet up with love." And this is not a political metaphor. And this is what they used to say to me in Arabic: "Come with me, because I'm going to meet up with love." And I was not interested in being the biggest or the strongest guy or the guy that's always right. No, I wasn't interested in that. I wanted to be a girl just like my sisters were, without forgetting that I was a boy, of course, because I'm not they were 6 and I was only 1, and I'm not transgender. And the other brothers were very heterosexual, so they don't enter into the formula here. So I think that I was very lucky because I was there with 6 girls, and that between them and myself there was something in the air. And I'd even say that it's even better than that. And even though in spite of what people did to them, or even in spite of what people told them to tell me, they were homosexuals like me. They lived my homosexuality too. They experienced it. I'm not sure if this makes sense, what I've just pointed out. But I think that the war, because here we are talking about this issue here today, I don't know how to express this or how to explain it. Well, the important thing for a child is not to be successful and to become a star, to become a major star, but rather for you to stick to an idea of love. And in my head, in my supreme intelligence as a child, I always connected with these women, even though they were protecting me, and that's where the war was for me. And then when I became a writer, I'm a writer because I'm the son of this woman, of this wonderful mother, and also because I've lived with these other sisters of mine. I'm their voice. It's not only me or myself, and all of that has to do with me and my persona. Do you recognize yourself in what I've just pointed out? Do you have brothers and sisters, Anna?
No, that was my biggest problem as a child, that I was alone. And maybe I actually, that's why I developed a lot of plots inside my head, because I didn't have anyone to discuss that with. And in what age were you born in France, or you came there at some point? I didn't quite understand.
Non, je suis né au...
No, I was born in Morocco, and I lived for 25 years in Morocco. And then after that, I migrated to France. So you were 25 years old then?
Man.
I'm sorry about the question. Well,
Ana,
Baby,
cuéntanos
yes.
un poco sobre...
Well, look at him, please. I want to talk about my book, Bibiana. I've spoken about everything except for my book. I didn't answer your question.
I guess. But are those things you've told us about somehow connected to the book, to the plot?
Oui, toute ma famille.
Yes, my family appears in all my books, in each and every book. My family is the most extraordinary thing that I have in my life. But I don't want to monopolize the floor here. But Bibiana, do you have brothers and sisters? I'm interested in knowing how you have managed all those wars in your family, all of those struggles.
Os cuento un poquito de yeguas exhaustas, de qué es lo que pasa ahí, porque efectivamente la familia, el imaginario va a ser realmente importante. ¿Cómo os contaría yo? ¿Qué es lo que pasa en yeguas exhaustas?
What's happening with Yegos Exhaustas? As I said before, there is a main protagonist that is called Beatriz in the book, and who has to deal with these minor situations that apparently seem to be more or less daily events, but which are going to have a big influence on her and are going to produce cracks, which at the end of the day makes everything blow up. So in other words, the war that appears in this book, and which I think in a certain way appears in our 3 books, is a war against the Imaginarium that is present in our lives. And that in Yeguas Exhaustas it has to do with something that we have inherited from poverty, as I point out in the book. And it really goes beyond what is purely economic. because in the book we have the mother, we have the grandmother. In other words, these women are these exhausted horses, yeguas exhaustas in Spanish, and these animals that work a lot, that are very powerful, that end up feeling absolutely exhausted, and that had to go through a number of circumstances. But now it's Beatriz. And Beatriz is no longer having the same experience as her grandmother, and no longer has the same experience as her mother either, but however is still sharing that imaginary. In other words, that's something that breaks us and influences us. And I always say this, and I think that this is the case, because my mother, although when she dies, even if she owns 3 mansions and 13 cars, and I don't think that is going to happen, she will die feeling poor, because poverty is in your head. Because it's an issue of how we think about the world and how we feel in the world. It has to do with being on a stage like this and one feeling nervous because you feel that, yes, this is not your space. Or that I'm going to do some paperwork, somebody, and you feel uncomfortable, or that somebody reminds you that that is not the space in which you should be. So based on these anecdotes, which is what this is what Beatriz is going to be talking about in the book. So she goes to the university at a given point in time, and she tries to study a career there. She tries to forge ahead, and she notices that the rest of the people that are in that circuit do not have the same circumstances, and that is obviously going to have a big influence on her. Or there are some family scenes that are going to crop up continuously throughout the book that have to do with music, for example. What kind of music did we listen to? How do we move to the music? How do we speak? And here I think the interpreters are going to go mad, and I would like to apologize to them beforehand, because I don't know how this is going to be translated. But in any case, Beatriz, for instance, grows up thinking that her house or her home should be the only one in the world where they listen to music by Manolo Escobar and Perlita de Huelva, and that the rest of the homes of the world listen to Bob Dylan or to Leonard Cohen. And that she is possibly the strange person. And when she becomes older and older and enters certain spaces, there's somebody that is pointing this out all the time, that is pointing out these references as if they were not the suitable ones in that particular space. So I know that this, in reality, I think that this is an experience that practically everybody has gone through. And if it's not with music, it will be with cinema or with any other thing. And I'm not sure if you've ever had close to you somebody that has said to you, and don't you really know this film director? And haven't you seen this film? Are you sure that you haven't seen this very, very interesting film? I can't believe it. So when somebody asks you that question, they are pointing at us and they're being condescending. And what they're telling us is that they're talking at us from the level of the elite, and they're saying that our references are not equally legitimate, or that they don't occupy the same space as ours. So this is what I was interested in talking about. In other words, those scenes that continuously remind us of where we are, which is what is going on. Okay, have you solved your technical issue there, Anna?
At that very moment, my battery went low.
Han colapsado.
Yes, it was just no translation. So
No te
I don't know,
preocupes,
like-
no te preocupes.
Well, don't worry. I was talking about Manolo Escobar, and that collapsed the whole thing. He was a sort of flamenco singer. But anyway, I'm sorry about that. Well, this is a bit traumatic. Well, what I was talking about, I was saying that in the book we have these minor situations that have to do with music and with filmmaking, and even with the way people eat or what they eat. And there's a very small scene, a very simple scene, in which Beatriz is abroad. She's studying abroad. She has an Erasmus grant, and she's having her meal at the university's dining room. And she takes fruit and eats it. How do you eat fruit? Well, you grab the knife, you cut it in half, and you take it directly to your mouth. That's how they eat it at home. like the shepherds have done when they were sitting on a rock in the middle of the countryside. And her colleagues at the university looked at her and laughed as if they found it very funny. And it's not even offensive. And they find that it's very funny the way she was eating her fruit. And she automatically feels as if she's being pointed at with a finger. Because this is something that has to do with her origins. And since that day, instead of eating fruit, I ate yogurts. So it's these little scenes where all of a sudden you go click, and this is where the imaginary crops up. And we have these tiny, tiny scenes, and we move on to others that are going to be much more severe or much more bigger, that have to do with the world of universities and with the difficulties that people have to join an institution as a professor. And this also has to do with the power relations that are established, because, well, there's even more pressure there because Beatriz is a woman, and a university professor is going to show up, a man older than she is, and he's going to make as much as he can of that particular situation. So I think that I've now updated you on what I was saying before.
So much.
No.
It just reminded me about the story that my friend, she was a very famous anthropologist in Russia, but she is now announced the enemy of the state, so she escaped from there, and she now is settled in Paris. Wow. So she told me, yeah, she's a part of this program Scientists in Danger. So being, there is a program, Scientists in Danger,
wow.
when you escape from the regime and such things, because in Russia she would be in prison. But I am not talking about this again. Like she told me the story that she, like 2 weeks ago maybe, it's just the same. She came to, and they had some kind of party with other anthropologists, with French anthropologists, and she's a Russian anthropologist. And they had meals, various food, wine, and everything, and there was cheese. And she started, like, maybe it is a Russian tradition, but if there is a piece of cheese, you cut it into pieces, and you invite all the others to take it. And in Russia, I'm not sure about Spain, but in Russia, cheese is what you eat before the meals. It's not a dessert. And in France, it turned out to be a dessert. And she said that no one was really making fun of her, but they all laughed. And she said, like in your story, and she said that she felt absolutely like from that she came from space, from another planet. Okay, and as for my book, I was talking about our books, right? It's a pity that I need to tell you another sad story, because I do write a lot of funny books, just trust me, but this Look at Him, in Spanish it is Tienes que mirar. It is a documentary book it is my personal story, and that was really my attempt to somehow defeat the whole system. I mean the medical system. I have 2 kids, and my older daughter is 19 now, and my younger son is 8. But between them, there should have been another child, and that was very unfortunate pregnancy, because due to some malformation, that boy was not going to survive. So I found out that he's not going to survive when I was approximately in the middle of my pregnancy. And the medical system in Russia is it may sound rather strange, but you can, if you have enough money for private clinics, you can use them all your life, and you can have no idea of what is happening in the so-called governmental clinics. And those governmental clinics, they are the descendants of the Soviet system, and they are still Soviet. So if something happens, if something goes wrong with pregnancy, private clinics immediately kick you off to that governmental system. They say, like, we don't deal with such things. And that is one of the phrases that I use in the book a lot, such things. Because such things is like some female things connected to, it's like to sex, gynecology, giving birth, and some ugly, nasty, bloody things that should be somehow hidden. So even the doctors did not dare to call it as it was. They said, okay, such things, some bad pregnancy. So I had to go to governmental clinic to solve, they also call that solve the problem. And so, and here I need maybe to explain that Soviet system, we had what we call the punitive gynecology and also punitive psychiatry, meaning that those two departments, medical departments, were the most cruel, and actually they sometimes even were used as to punish someone who for instance, dissidents, not gynecology, but psychiatry. But gynecological system in Soviet Union was always extremely cruel to women, and it somehow followed the path of, they had a very special understanding of the concept of strength. A woman, as each member of the society, just like in Sparta, should be strong, because if you are weak, you are a bad member of this, you are a bad tool in this big organism. So you need to be strong, and only if you are strong, you get some respect. If you are weak and if you complain, if you have some problems, and if, like with that Spartan boy who is bitten with a fox, and who needed to be silent, because if the fox bites you and you scream, it means that you are weak and you are actually doomed. You need to, like, strength and respect in this Soviet approach implied that if you are grieving, if you are losing your baby or whatever, you should keep silence. That is a virtue not to show your grief. And all the doctors deal with this with no compassion at all. Absolutely, they and it's like it's not an appropriate thing to do, even, for instance, to call this unborn baby a baby, because again, in Soviet Union, abortion was a means of contraception. So if you call that a baby, that would imply that women like did really bad things, and for them it was contraception. And so all the system implied that nothing bad was happening at all. And they were really surprised that I was grieving, crying, and they were even more surprised when I asked them if that would be possible to keep this pregnancy to the term and then to say goodbye maybe to the baby, because they had no regulations for that. They insisted that it should be terminated immediately, and there were no possibility actually to choose another path. So afterwards, when the problem was solved this way or another, in a year after that, I decided to write a book about this whole anti-human approach. And it was not, I wanted it to be not only aimed at protecting like women with pregnancies at risk. It was just about this anti-human approach which still perceives with us. So I even, like when one of the doctors was very rude to me, and my husband, he was furious about that, and he said, okay, I want to go, and like I want to kick his face for that, for what you've told you. And I said, no, don't do something, don't do anything, I will kick him with words afterwards. So I wrote the book in order to break, and it is also a very unsafe topic. It is a taboo. You cannot actually talk about that in face of the audience, and especially in a book, because books are not created for talking about such ugly things like gynecology and all that stuff, women's stuff. So after I published a book, the war really started, because it was a great scandal. And like I was a little bit worried about this book when I wrote it, that it is so sad that no one was going to read it, but I was mistaken. Everyone read it, because all the media wrote how awful the existing of the book is. And this book was shortlisted for quite a prestigious award, which is called National Bestseller. And the jury, it got into the shortlist, and the jury said that it is a shame to have such a book in the shortlist, because literature is not for such things. They used the same words. So I don't know what to add to this. Another sad story of mine.
Well, I think that it's interesting to see that all three books are talking about things that are still tremendously uncomfortable, because they're talking about the bodies, about things that happen to your body, and which happened very frequently too, much more frequently than we think, and which are still addressed as if they were anomalies in a certain respect. But personally, I wanted to ask you, are you surprised by the very good welcome this book has had abroad, at least in Spain? Because I think that it's been a very, very outstanding book. And I think that it breaks you up completely when you read it. It breaks you up a lot. And I think that there are many, many readers that are very excited about this book.
I was very surprised about that. And actually, well, it sold very good in Russia, although it was like ugly, nasty things, but people really wanted to read it, so it sold good in Russia. But Spain was on the second place. The book was translated into several other languages, including English, but only Spanish readers somehow wanted to read it, and there were several editions. And yes, first I was very surprised by that. And so when one of the journalists, and I gave a lot of interviews about that book for Spanish journalists. So I just asked one of them, as if I was interviewing her, why are you Spanish so interested in this Russian Soviet nightmare? Why? And then she explained me a little bit. So I understood that for Spanish readers, it is also about what you've mentioned, about losing control over your body. But it's on the opposite side of this. You know, this is the on the polar side. Like in Russia, I lose control in the way that I cannot prolong this pregnancy, and I need to terminate it in the most cruel way that you can imagine. I'm not going to describe it, but it's bad. It's not up to date, so to say. And not only in Spain, by the way, but in Latin American countries as well, that is when we talk about this late termination. It is another, just the opposite program. You sometimes cannot make an abortion if you want it. You also lose control over your body, because some people in the government, or I don't know, in the church, they decide for you that you need to keep it to the term. And actually what I was aiming at is at proving that actually a woman has the right to choose. One of that, like that both options should be open. And even if she, all right, she chooses, but that there should be no space for, well, even if you have a right to do that, but everyone looks at you and says, okay, look what she has done. She has committed a sin. That this reaction is also like it's medieval. So what I think why Spanish women and maybe men like the book is that they also want to have that control over their decisions about their bodies.
Yo creo que hay una
Well, I think that there's lots of hunger, generally speaking, about talking about all those things that people couldn't talk about before. And that is, one of the subjects has to do with bodies and with this lack of control, which in many instances is something that is there open to all. And in fact, there were several texts that appeared. Well, there were several places where they translated your book, and they were talking about grief and natal loss and everything that had to do with the moment of managing a body before and after. But in any case, we have very few minutes left, so if you want, we can now move on to the questions to see if... Well, I have 6 sisters, and I've gone through the 6 pregnancies of my sisters, and I was the young boy that helped my sisters. I helped them delivering the babies. And I've seen all of these things that have to do with women that we men are not supposed to know about. And I know a lot about this intimacy. And I have carried the babies of my sisters on my shoulders. And perhaps homosexuality has brought me closer to this sexual and biological reality of women and to whatever is produced by the bodies of women. And this is something that I'm perfectly familiar with. I'm not sure if I'm supposed to talk about my book, or isn't it really worthwhile now? I've got 1 minute left to talk about my book. Well, okay, I've got 1 minute left to talk about my book. Well, I've written several books, and some of them have been translated into Spanish, and I just wanted to point out something. And regarding what you said before, Bibiana, all of those little details that betray our social origins and which, let's say, make us feel poor, but we are poor internally. It's a deep-rooted poverty. I was born in the Arab world and speaking Arabic, but I've written all of my books in French. But I didn't go to Paris or France believing that they were superior to me, that they were better than my sisters and my mother. And well, whenever there were rich Moroccans who appeared on television in the 80s, my sisters and my mother used to criticize them. They criticized the Moroccan power and the Moroccan authorities and the rich Moroccans that were using French, the language of enlightenment, but it was also the language of the French colonization in Morocco. And that is how you can see how the power and the rich Moroccans were subjecting the rest of the Moroccan population by speaking a language that wasn't their own language, and by telling them that Arabic, as you only speak Arabic, you're poor. You're poor in your own language, But my mother and my sisters, when these people appeared on television, that is the people with power, that is the rich people, the Moroccan intellectuals who studied in Paris at the Sorbonne and who then went back to Morocco to civilize us with the French method, when my mother saw that, she fell out laughing. She laughed out very loud indeed, because she criticized the king, Hassan III, and he criticized the way he dressed up. And she used to say, look, he's now going to quote the Quran. So she was destroying the political discourse. People were using foreign language, French, as if French represented freedom much better than Arabic. And that, for me, was a major political and literary lesson. And when I reached out to the French language, I didn't become a small Arab that wanted to be accepted in Paris or France. No, the opposite. What I tried to do I tried to maintain myself in that position that my mother expressed perfectly well, because my mother was illiterate between inverted commas, and she was also a peasant, and she was everything but illiterate, because she understood absolutely everything, and she wasn't even afraid of the king. And when the police came knocking on our door to say you could not build another floor on top of your house, my mother reinvented the language to know how to speak to the police officers and how to convince the people with power and convince the police. Well, I would just like to say that I understand this discourse that has to do with poverty. It's something that exists, and it also surrounds me. But as far as I am concerned, well, thank goodness that we had these women that were not afraid of the King of Morocco, nor were they afraid of the police, nor of France. And for them, the idea of freedom and emancipation was something that they were building for themselves in parallel. And I believe that writing and the model that I have to stick to as a native, and with the country previously colonized by France, was the model that was designed and implemented by Muddle. And I didn't feel as if I were a tiny guy compared to the French or the Spanish writers. And in this Western world that is presented as if it were all about freedom and emancipation, and as if freedom and emancipation that was carried out by my mother and my sisters that invented and reinvented, it didn't have such a big effect, and they were not able to produce such a significant revolution as what happened in Paris. Well, my sisters and my mother have always been very revolutionary, but they've never followed what happened in the Western world. And there's still a very colonizing language that I believe that somebody like myself could say, well, no, the Moroccans or people like me are people that don't understand anything, and that Arabic is all about illiteracy and about being submissive. But my mother couldn't care less if her neighbors called her a witch, because she was a witch in a certain way. But she also taught me to do witchcraft, and I still apply that. And I also apply that to my sexual lovers in Paris. Thank you very much, Mum. Thank you very much, Mother. You want to ask any questions now? We can see the audience now, because before you were sitting in the dark. We couldn't see anybody. So now we can see you guys, and we feel a little bit closer to you people. Well, I have a question for Mr. Taïa on this issue of witchcraft and all of these other ideas that have to do with these heads that think in such a peculiar manner in the book. How? Because this forms part of an imaginary that is related to the language and to the Arab culture, although we have our own witchcraft in France too. But I think that it's something that reaches out to all languages. And when you speak in another language, sometimes it's difficult to express these things, because the power of this witchcraft has to do with the language, and it's not easy to transfer it to another language. Well, I'm write in a language that is not my own language, and I use the Arab and Moroccan witchcraft. And I think that in writing is all about witchcraft or sorcery, and as I have experienced that with my mother, for instance, I also know the Moroccan prostitutes that are the most marvelous women in the world, and all of these women knew that these men were people that had been told, look, you have the power, but they couldn't use the same weapons as the men, and they were using something that is much more important, and which is linked to the original imaginary, so to speak, of the land of Morocco. And this also has to do with Egypt, and something that the French colonization had not erased, and that's the most important thing, because the French colonization tried to transform Morocco and the Moroccans, and France left, leaving us with a very poor point of view of what we were really like. But these women refused to accept this. They were bad towards men, which is what they had to do by using this witchcraft. And perhaps this is why I've been so fortunate, because I was born homosexual, because these women had no shame of saying these things in front of me, because they said, well, this little homosexual is of no matter, no concern. And this position that I had as a little man that is of no importance whatsoever gave me access. I saw them do absolutely everything. Not only that, but sometimes we used to get up at 2 o'clock in the morning, and we used to go to the houses of certain people and stood outside and cast sorcery and waited until the next day to see the outcome. So it's not about an imaginary that people imagines the 1,000 nights, and that people believe that this is a very oriental thing that only has to do with the Arabs and Africans. No, for me this is a real science, and it's a real way of resisting the power of men and how to castrate men, and that's what it's all about. Because my mother and my 6 sisters managed to do that, but my 6 sisters were not that good in doing that. But in any case, my mother did manage to do that. But you have to bear in mind that when I say this, it was a legitimate way of defending yourself, and the final target was not how to enslave these men, but they had no other option at their disposal. But anyway, I could write lots of books about this, but the issue is that I don't want to reveal the secrets of my mother and my sisters. And for me, it's important to keep their secrets under wraps, because this is what allowed them to resist the real life they were living. I don't write books to hurt them. They have told me this, and I just apply this to my writing. But in any case, a long life to witchcraft. Do you know any witches? Are you witches yourselves? No? Do you also practice witchcraft and sorcery? Well, you have the possibility of publishing a manual on witchcraft to dominate men. Well, if you're willing to reveal the secrets, please do go ahead, because that would be a very interesting read. Yes, I will do that one of these days. But I'm not going to give you the recipes, though, because if you give people the recipes, well, then there's something that you kill off completely. Well, I'm the translator of Abdellah Taïa into Spanish. Well, many thanks for your work. And although I understand what Abdellah has pointed out today, Abdellah says that his writing is all about war. He's always warring against the world and against society. And the Moroccans are fighting against colonization too. But I have the opposite experience as the reader of his works. And as the title of today is all about war and truce, I think that the books by Abdellah are an example of truce and even of peace, because you always talk about wars, about the true wars, and then you talk about the social wars. You're talking about the wars between different classes or between different races, of the migrants against the non-migrants, or against those that are working. But then these wars, it turns out that these wars, when these people become individualized, because we're talking about people in the works by Abdellah Taïa, that's when you can understand that it's these social groups that actually are warring against power. But when they have names, and when they are neighbors, when it's your next door neighbor and your downstairs neighbor, the only thing you can do is understand each other. And that's how you can understand why in the war you had a certain attitude and not another, and even why your hair was cut off in the liberation, because the criminal reaches an agreement with police officers. So these are beautiful stories of peace and truce. So I love your work, and I'm delighted to have read your book. Thank you very much. Thank you very much for your kind words. Thank you very much, Lilia. Thank you. I have a question. Well, Bibiana, there's a question for you that I could also have for the other two. But you've spoken a lot about your mother, or you've spoken about the women in your family as a source of inspiration. That is perhaps the past. But from now on, which do you think are the issues that are going to serve as an inspiration relative to the future, for future novels or for future writings that you want to share with us, with your public, with your audience, and for you two guys, for Anna and for Abdellah? Could I take your text into a classroom and say that you are writers in exile, which is like a genre, because a Moroccan who lived in Morocco until age 25 and whose mother tongue is Arabic. So I could therefore think that perhaps we could include you under that category. Like Mina Alouf, somebody that is Arab but writes in French, produces in France in French and is in Europe. And for Anna, who has to live in exile, because after the many things you've spoken about, this reinforces the idea that we have about Russia. Do you consider yourself to be a Russian writer in exile or exiled? And I'd also like to ask you, in your case, Abdellah, if in the Arab world, has your novel been translated into Arabic? Are you read it in Egypt or in Jordan, for instance? How does it work when you openly say that you're homosexual? Because that's another taboo. And in the case of Anna, well, perhaps now, unfortunately, it's very sad to say this, but perhaps your sales will increase, because anything that criticizes, at least this happens in Europe, a regime like Putin's is something that is also very welcome as regards the political elites. That's what my question is all about. And for you, Bibiana, how do you project yourself? Thank you. Well, it's a pity because we have 1 minute left, so I'm going to try to be very brief and give them the floor. But what I'd just like to point out that in the novel, in Yeguas Exhaustas, I'm not talking about the past. The story that I'm telling, and even though these characters appear, is not the story of the previous generations, but rather of the present generations and future generations. Something that I found was very important in the case of this book, because in the end it's like a catalogue, it's like a sample book of class violence, and how this is going to show us how this social element is not true, and how it works and will carry on working in the future. I am a teacher. I'm working in 4th year, and now I'm sending kids to the university, and I know that they've been promised something and they're never going to achieve that promise. At least in most cases, it's going to be impossible for them to do so. But this has to do with that crack, with that gap, with that promise that has been broken, with this false modernity, or with that false progress that has not really happened. And that's what I meant to say before. And although we have all that genealogy, these are texts that are analysing the present and the future too. And well, I can't say any more because we're running out of time. So we've run out of time. So go ahead, please.
Very short. As I now live in Georgia, I understood that I need really that the only way for me is to use this the real circumstances around me. So I had an idea of a novel when I was before the war, when I was settled in Moscow, and I found a way to preserve the whole story, but I changed the circumstances. So now part of the plot is part of the action is taking part in Georgia, which is actually very good because there are some witches, monsters, and by the way, a lot of witchcraft in this novel. This is sci-fi. This is not about my sufferings. So I explored and researched a lot of Georgian mythological creatures, which are extremely interesting, and no one in the world knows about that. So I decided to add them to the plot, and so that would be a novel combined, a novel with those added Georgian atmosphere and creatures. And I think for that novel it is pretty good.
Oui, parce qu'il y a de
Yes, yes, because there's witchcraft in the book, because it contains witchcraft, so that's why it's going to be so good. Well, as regards the issue of being exiled or not, I have this card as a homosexual that I can show you so that you can cry. But when I write, I try not to mention that very much, and I don't want to become a victim. I don't want to make people sorry for me, because otherwise it's all going to be about me and myself. And as I said, I was born into a family with 11 people in it. And the only way of surviving in that family was to not accept people's rejection, because I felt that they were rejecting me. So what we have to try to do is change those people that live with you. It's only me that can change those people. And this is something that I understood when I was a little boy. And in a way, I've been successful because they didn't throw me out. And my mother gave me money to pay for my bus ticket so I could go to Rabat every day to the university. She got up at the same time as I did. And I eventually understood that it was her way of accepting me without actually saying so in words. So I was not exiled, nor I didn't accept that. So if you accept exile, that means that you sentenced to being on your own forever and ever. I don't want to be on my own. I live on my own. I have problems with Paris and with France too, because what I can see is that there are not very many people that I can get in touch with. But if my mother rejected me, I went back to her. So in other words, it's all about love again. When there's no love, a time comes when you have to make it up so that you don't drop dead. I didn't want to drop dead, in fact. So what can I say? Look, Mummy, I'm homosexual, accept me, because if I were to say that, she would reject me, and she's going to exert that power of society even stronger on me. So when I wrote my book, I did so based on this option of trying to get closer to them. And I didn't write the book saying, look, I'm in exile and I'm much better than my mother. I'm better than my sisters too. And it's me and myself that understands the world better than they do. No, because if I were to do that, it's as if I were to acquire a sort of superiority that is going to give rise to a narcissistic and egocentric literature that I'm not at all interested in. And this is my conclusion. Well, thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you.